Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Wednesday, April 2nd, and for today's headlines we have Crumbling Trust in American Institutions. MHA activist takes on Girl Scout cookies. Cory Booker's anti-Trump speech on the Senate floor has lasted 19 hours and counting. Trump says he's settled on a tariff plan that is set to take effect Wednesday. 4 Tesla dealers claim they sold 8,653 cars in 3 days in Canada. Did they? Dashun lost on Australian island is still alive, but elusive. Crumbling trust in American institutions. A MAHA activist takes on Girl Scout cookies. It's been a great year for Zen Honeycutt and our grassroots advocacy group Moms Across America. President Trump appointed Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a longtime ally and advisor to her organization, to become the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. Honeycutt, who considers herself part of Kennedy's Making America Healthy Again movement, literally cried tears of joy when she heard Kennedy was selected, and she traveled to Capitol Hill, where she had a front row seat at Kennedy's state confirmation hearing. Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, cited her organization's work when introducing a bill to eliminate toxic substances in school lunches and increase support for organic farmers and others who farm using sustainable practices. After years of having her research and advocacy dismissed as fringe, kooky, or ignorable by mainstream media outlets, scientists, and regulators, and much of the public, Honeycutt's organization recently co-sponsored a study that got lots of people talking about toxic contaminants in the U.S. food supply. The study made a big splash, probably because it focused on something as American as apple pie, Girl Scout cookies. It found trace amounts of heavy metals, arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury, aluminum, and an herbicide called glyphosate, the active ingredient in a weed killer Roundup in cookies. This is not just about Girl Scout cookies, Honeycutt says. Pretty much all cookies, unless they're organic, are going to have probably the same results. In fact, a lot of food in general, basically anything that's not organic, is probably going to have similar results. Basically, by definition, non-organic conventional foods are exposed to synthetic pesticides and herbicides like glyphosate, and heavy and other metals can be found in lots of food, including organic foods, because they're often found in the environment, including the soil that plants absorb and then animals then eat. At least 2 fact-checking sites have investigated this study of Girl Scout cookies and concluded that its findings are misleading and basically not as scary as they may sound. We spoke with the toxicologist Joe Zarowski at Michigan State University Center for Research on Ingredient Safety, who said something similar. Zarowski criticized the cookie study for its small sample size, 25 cookies, its lack of peer review, and other methodological issues. And he contended that the levels of heavy metals, aluminum, and herbicide that the study found in the cookies are not dangerous. The level of glyphosate found in Girl Scout cookies, for example, is so extremely small, Zarowski said, that a 70-pound child would have to eat over 73,000 cookies a day to reach the level that would cause concern over their lifetime. Look, maybe I could do it, but that's a lot of cookies. Zarowski says it's a similar story with the trace amounts of heavy metals and aluminum found in the cookies. This is all okay, he assured us. There's a saying in toxicology, the dosage makes the poison. And this dosage, he says, according to a lot of peer-reviewed scientific evidence and government regulatory standards, is so low it is not a concern. The study, nonetheless, has proved to be a PR nightmare for the Girl Scouts. It went viral on social media and was referenced by juggernaut podcaster Joe Rogan. It even recently inspired a pending class action lawsuit against the Girl Scouts, which generated another wave of bad press. While we don't comment on pending litigation, we remain committed to vigorously defending ourselves against these allegations and supporting our Girl Scouts throughout the country. We're actively learning entrepreneurial and leadership skills through the Girl Scout Cookie Program, said a Girl Scout of USA spokesperson. The Girl Scouts published a blog post in February addressing the study and assured cookie eaters that Girl Scout cookies are safe to consume and are manufactured in accordance with all food safety regulations. Criticisms of Moms Across America's study aside, the attention it has received could be seen as a win for Honeycutt's goals of getting more Americans to reconsider what they put in their bodies, avoid conventional foods and buy organic, and question whether food companies and the government are doing a good enough job to make sure our food is safe. The whole saga shines a spotlight on the rising levels of distrust in American institutions. In 2025, no organization is above a suspicion, even the Girl Scouts, and this breakdown of trust complicates solutions to a core economic problem we face in our consumer society. We often lack complete information about the things we consume, and we rely on trust in authorities to assure us what we consume is safe. What happens when those authorities lose people's trust? The economic problem behind food regulation. When we go to the grocery store and buy something, we face an economic problem. Economists have a wonky term for it. They call it asymmetric information. It's a mouthful, but the idea is simple in the food realm. We often don't know or have a hard time verifying what's in the stuff we eat and drink, and that lack of information can cause problems in a free market, like companies selling us food that can make us sick, maybe slowly over years, without us even knowing it. Consumers need information to make the best choices for themselves and their families when they shop. Without that information, companies may not face strong enough market incentives to produce high quality or safe products. It's often cheaper to cut corners, use lower quality ingredients, and make food products in unsanitary conditions. If consumers don't really know what's going on, then companies may not face market pressure to do the right thing. The economist literature suggests that because of imperfect information, the free market can fail to operate in our best interest. Economists and policymakers have long cited the problem of asymmetric information as a core reason that food companies need to be regulated. Over the 20th century, lawmakers created the Food and Drug Administration and other agencies to ensure trust and safety in the food supply, and they required food companies to label their products with ingredients and nutritional information. This has helped consumers make the leap of faith when buying and ingesting stuff made by strangers, and overcome the asymmetric information problem. But as Moms Across America studies have shown, there are often small amounts of substances in our food that are not labeled. It's not just Girl Scout cookies. The organization, for example, sponsored tests of school lunches, fast food, beer and wine, and baby formula, and Honeycutt says they found contaminants that concern her in all of them. In some cases, scientists have directly engaged with these findings and concluded that the levels of contaminants they found aren't a significant concern for public health. For example, an article in a scientific journal, Regulatory Toxicology and Pharmacology, investigated one of the Moms Across America studies that found glyphosate in urine and breast milk. It concluded that the finding does not support the conclusion that these glyphosate concentrations present a health risk to the public, including nursing children. However, Honeycutt believes ingesting even just small levels of contaminants can affect our health. She says that these contaminants are so widespread throughout the food supply that they add up in our diets over time. Honeycutt is a strong believer in the health benefits of eating organic and non-GMO or non-bioengineered foods. She says that when making the switch for her family, she saw real health benefits. Having grown up in hippy-dippy California and as a frequent shopper of health food stores, I can tell you that many people, including my loved ones, believe that organic is healthier. They also tend to believe that organic is a signal of other desirable attributes, like tasting better or being made by small local farms with more love and care, although this might not always be true. Despite these products typically costing more, the market for organic food has exploded over the last couple of decades. This is maybe why I was a bit surprised to hear from Zarowski that scientists doubt whether organic or non-GMO foods are really better for us. The scientific consensus on organic farming practices and GMO versus non-GMO is that non-GMO and organic foods are not safer than conventionally grown crops, Zarowski says. There's no major health benefits to eating organic versus non-organic, and so the fact of the matter is, no, non-GMO and organic are not healthier for us. That may be a tough one to swallow for many of us. Like, really? What about all the pesticides and herbicides and hormones and antibiotics and bioengineering in conventional foods? I talked with various organic eaters about the scientific literature that suggests that organic isn't safer or healthier, and they told me things like scientific conclusions change over time. This certainly seems to be true in the area of nutrition science, which is difficult to conduct and evolves as new evidence comes to light. Take wine. Scientific studies used to suggest that a glass of wine a day was fine, even healthy. Now evidence suggesting any amount of alcohol may be a cancer risk. It's a huge bummer. America is in the midst of what you might call a food awakening, and people are questioning what we're putting in our bodies like maybe never before. Researchers are connecting our diets to a surge of all sorts of health maladies, including obesity, heart disease, and cancer. This food awakening can be seen beyond just the explosion in demand for organic and non-GMO foods. It can also be seen in the growing concern about the health effects of consuming things like ultra-processed foods, sugar, alcohol, and seemingly ubiquitous microplastics, as well as the movement to ban food dyes and preservatives. Regulatory capture, another economic problem for food safety. For regulators to work in overcoming the problem of asymmetric information, it's critical that people trust that the regulators are looking out for them. But economists have long pointed out that sometimes regulators don't serve the public interest. They can come under the influence of powerful companies they're regulating. Economists call this regulatory capture. It's an empirical question and a big debate in economy and policy circles, when and why that happens and how to combat it. In defending their cookies, the Girl Scouts of USA stress that their trusted bakers remain committed to compliance with all food safety standards and regulations set forth by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and other relevant health authorities. Honeycutt says she agrees that Girl Scouts are complying with existing regulatory standards, but she questions whether those regulations or lack of regulations are keeping the public safe. Honeycutt made clear that she believes big corporations have a big influence on the food and agriculture regulations that get implemented. Our system is corrupt, she says. I think we must strive as a democracy to overcome industry capture. Zurawski expressed a general faith in the food regulatory process. He went on at great length about ethic rules that discourage conflicts of interest, transparency rules that enable consumers to look at the evidence behind regulatory decisions, and how federal regulatory agencies make decisions based on peer-reviewed science. Zurawski says that regulators on glyphosate, heavy metals, and other contaminants are guided by the best available evidence, and that regulatory standards for allowable amounts in our food are set extremely low out of an abundance of caution to make sure that everybody is safe in the population, even the most sensitive. I have 3 kids, and I have no issue giving them these cookies, said Zurawski. He stressed that experts who analyze this data and set safety standards live in the same environment we live in. They're going to the same stores we do. They're likely feeding their kids roughly the same things our kids are eating. So I can't imagine a situation where someone would say that, for the sake of monetary gain, I'm okay with making my child sick. But these days, Americans, fed an information diet from social media and subversive podcasts, seem to increasingly distrust the experts and regulatory authorities. For a long time, their authority helped American consumers overcome the problem of asymmetric information about their food. But now, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, a growing number of Americans are distrustful when authorities go against something seemingly intuitive, like the idea that ingesting low levels of herbicide and heavy metals over your lifetime will be bad for your health. But it can be easy to cast aspirations. Zurawski, for instance, is a highly accredited professor at a university who has spent his career steeped in science all this stuff. He has spent years studying the effects of food ingredients and contaminants and promoting public health. At the same time, his institution, the Center for Research on Ingredient Safety at Michigan State University, discloses that it gets some of its funding from industry partners, which include major corporations like the Coca-Cola Co., PepsiCo, and Hershey's Co., and ConAgra brands. Should that make you trust him less? What about Zen Honeycutt? She's not credited in science and often challenges scientific consensus, and her organization, Moms Across America, sells alternative medicine supplements and products like Vaccine Detox Herbal Extract and Lifeway frequency patches on its website. Should that make you trust her less? Honeycutt rejects what seems to be the scientific consensus on issues like the health effects of small doses of glyphosate, aluminum, and heavy metals in cookies, as well as the claim that organic is not really better for us. We asked her if we can't trust what's considered the scientific consensus on what's safe, and if we can't trust the regulators tasked with looking out for our health, who can we trust? I think that we should trust independent scientists that are not funded by corporations, she said. I think we should trust ourselves and our friends and family members, our community members that are close to us, that have either used certain products or eaten certain foods and it's worked for them. That's why we encourage in-person connections and really tune into ourselves. Our bodies tell us what's good for us. When you really tune in when you're eating something and it doesn't work for you, you should trust that. Honeycutt also expressed hope that Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will help improve trust in our system and food regulation. The Trump administration, however, is slashing the workforce of the Department of Health and Human Services, including 3,500 jobs at the Food and Drug Administration. A recent department fact sheet stresses this reduction will not affect drug, medical device, or food viewers, nor will it impact inspectors. But still, with a significantly smaller workforce, won't that undermine the FDA and other regulatory agencies' work? Honeycutt says she believes that Kennedy can do more with a smaller workforce than others have done with bigger workforces, that he will improve trust in our system and food regulation by, for example, making sure people that are hired to fill these positions are in these regulatory agencies can't be bought. In fact, she says she submitted her resume, and if she's offered the right position, she's ready to enter public service. She says she trusts Kennedy more than probably any other public figure I've ever come in contact with. Since taking office, Kennedy has prioritized going after contaminants in our food supply, including in baby formula. So what would it take for Honeycutt to eat some Thin Mints? For the uninitiated, that's a popular kind of Girl Scout cookie, one that her study found had the highest level of glyphosate among the cookies tested. Her answer was simple: if they were organic. Cory Booker's anti-Trump speech on the Senate floor has lasted 19 hours and counting. Senator Cory Booker has spent all of Monday night and Tuesday morning on the Senate floor, delivering an impassioned speech in protest of the Trump administration's policies. The effort, which also involves numerous Democrats, is inching closer to a record by the hour. The New Jersey Democrat took the podium at 7 p.m. Eastern, vowing to speak for as long as I'm physically able. He was still standing with glasses on and papers in hand as of 2 p.m. Tuesday, taking periodic breaks from speaking by yielding to questions from his colleagues. By early afternoon, over 52,000 people were watching Booker's live stream on YouTube. I've been hearing from people all over my state and indeed all over the nation calling upon folks in Congress to do more, to do things that recognize the urgency, the crisis at the moment, Booker said in a video posted to social media beforehand. And so we all have the responsibility, I believe, to do something different, to cause, as late Rep. John Lewis said, good trouble, and that includes me. Booker's speech has taken aim at President Trump, White House senior advisor Elon Musk, and policies that he says show a complete disregard for the rule of law, the Constitution, and the needs of the American people. The speech covered a wide range of topics overnight, from healthcare and Social Security to immigration, the economy, public education, free speech, and foreign policy, and it included portions of letters that Booker said he had received from affected constituents, as well as public comments from world leaders in recent weeks. In just 71 days, the president has inflicted harm after harm on American safety, financial stability, foundations of our democracy, and any sense of common decency, Booker said in his introductory statements. These are not normal times in our nation, and they should not be treated as such in the United States Senate. Trump and Musk have not commented publicly on Booker's speech. It comes at a tense time for Booker's party. 9 Democrats joined with Republicans to advance a Trump-backed spending bill last month, preventing a government shutdown but alienating constituents who want lawmakers to push back against the president's agenda. Booker has not yet pulled out the phone book or children's literature to read from, as some of his predecessors have done on the Senate floor. He stayed focused on the topic of Trump's agenda and how he says it is hurting everyday Americans, weaving together domestic and foreign policy concerns. In the 15th hour, he said he had fuel in the tank. About 16 and 24 minutes in, Booker looked at the time and said, "We are way behind the schedule of where we wanted to be at this point," but he didn't immediately move to wrap things up. "And so to obey my staff, as senators are told to do, I want to move quickly to housing issues," he said. Booker paused for a brief prayer at the Senate Chaplain at noon, followed by a long-standing Senate rule. Chaplain Barry Black specifically thanked floor staff, Capitol Police, stenographers, the pages, and all those who have worked throughout the night. What are the rules? The use of long speeches to delay legislation known as a filibuster is a time-honored tradition in the Senate. But that's not technically what Booker's speech is, since he's not trying to block a specific bill or nominee. Under Senate rules, unless special limits on debate are in effect, a senator who has been recognized by the presiding officer can speak as long as they wish, according to the Congressional Research Service. They usually cannot be forced to cede the floor or even be interrupted without their consent, it says. They must meet a few requirements, however. For one, the senator must remain standing and must speak more or less continuously, the Congressional Research Service states, which become more difficult as the hours pass. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, posted on X Monday night that Booker had employed an interesting tactic to that effect. Corey had a Senate page take his chair away to eliminate any temptation to sit down, he wrote, just under 3 hours of the speech. Booker employed another strategy at various points, permitting his fellow Democrats to ask questions, which is the only way a senator can yield without losing the floor. But it's only partial relief. The senator must remain standing while others are talking. "I'll yield for questions while retaining the floor," Booker responded each time a senator asked for his permission. More than a dozen Democrats participated in the proceedings throughout Tuesday morning, including Murphy, Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey, Senator Peter Welch of Vermont, Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, Senator Christian Gillibrand of New York, Senators Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, Senators Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey of Massachusetts, Senators Chris Van Hollen and Angela Alsbrook of Maryland, Senators Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, and Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico. What did other Democrats say? The senators each spoke for several minutes about various issues Booker had mentioned, from Medicaid to tariffs to national security, veteran affairs, agriculture, and housing. They asked Booker questions, giving him time to elaborate on their topics of choice, and applauded his persistence. "I thank the gentleman for his fortitude, his strength, and the crystalline brilliance with which he has shown the American people the huge dangers that face them with this Trump-Doge-Musk administration," Senator Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said at the end of his second round of questioning on Tuesday morning, referring to the Department of Government Efficiency that Musk oversees. Booker also heaped praise on his colleagues, talking up their accomplishments and shared work experience. While the tone of his speech was somber, there were some moments of levity between lawmakers. At one point, Klobuchar, who quoted Minnesota native Bob Dylan, asked Booker to name his favorite New Jersey musician, and he gracefully deflected. Later, while responding to Schumer's praise, Booker joked that never before in history in America has a man from Brooklyn had so many complimentary things about a man from Newark, where Schumer responded saying that they are both New York Giants fans. Booker reminded him that the team plays in New Jersey and would discuss it no further. This is not a colloquy, he said, with a mock seriousness of those in the rooms laughed. I held the floor. I do not yield. How long can these speeches go? Booker's speech is a marathon effort. It is not the longest to grace the Senate floor, but is climbing up the list. This effort surpassed those of Murphy, who led Democrats for a push for gun control legislation that lasted 15 hours after the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016 in the land of Florida. Booker was by his side for the entire speech, said Tuesday that Murphy had returned the favor. Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas held the floor for 21 hours and 19 minutes, as he advocated unsuccessfully for defunding the Affordable Care Act in 2013, more than 8 hours longer than the Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky did when he filibustered John Brennan's CIA nomination months earlier. The longest filibuster on record is 1957 speech by then Democratic Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina in opposition of the Civil Rights Act that lasted 24 hours and 18 minutes. Media reported at the time that Thurmond sustained himself with diced pumpernickel and bits of cooked hamburger and sips of orange juice. His aide set up a bucket in the cloakroom so he could keep a foot on the Senate floor if he needed to relieve himself. Oh, excuse me. Trump says he settled on a tariff plan that is set to take effect Wednesday. The president did not reveal the details of his plan to impose reciprocal tariffs the same day, but suggested he would move ahead with import taxes on trading partners. President Trump has settled on a final plan for sweeping reciprocal tariffs, which are expected to take effect on Wednesday after he announces the details at an afternoon Rose Garden ceremony. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed the timeline in a briefing with reporters on Tuesday, adding that Mr. Trump had been huddling with his trade team to hash out the finer points of an approach meant to end decades of unfair trade practices. When pressed on whether the administration was worried the tariffs could proved to be the wrong approach, Ms. Leavitt struck a confident note. They're not going to be wrong, she said. It's going to work. The administration has been weighing several different tariff strategies in recent weeks. One option examined by the White House is a 20% flat tariff on all imports, which advisors said could help raise more than $6 trillion in revenue for the U.S. government. But advisors have also discussed the idea of assigning different tariff levels to countries depending on the trade barriers those countries impose against American products. They have also said that some nations might avoid tariffs entirely by striking trade deals with the United States. Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office on Monday, Mr. Trump said the United States would be very nice, relatively speaking, in imposing tariffs on a vast number of countries, including U.S. allies, that he believes are unfairly inhibiting the flow of American exports. That word reciprocal is very important, Mr. Trump told reporters. What they do to us, we do to them. By Tuesday, Ms. Leavitt said the president had made a decision and was with his trade team now perfecting it. When asked if companies could do anything to avoid the tariffs, Ms. Leavitt said the president was always up to take a phone call from companies, but was very focused on fixing the wrongs of the past. She also said that many foreign governments have called the president and his team to talk about tariffs, but that Mr. Trump was focused on the interests of the United States. The president has a brilliant team of advisors who have been studying these issues for decades, and we are focusing on restoring the golden age of America and making America a manufacturing superpower, she said. The prospect of tariffs left markets uneasy. Stocks edged down at the start of trading, with the S&P 500 opening about 0.4% lower than the rebounding after a choppy day Monday that ended with the index registering its worst month and quarter since 2022. Investors are still seeking clarity on the scope of Mr. Trump's reciprocal tariffs, and the economic uncertainty surrounding a global trade war has fueled stock market volatility in recent weeks. It has similarly troubled the manufacturing industry, which shows signs of contradiction in March, according to data released Tuesday from the Institute of Supply Management, which is closely tracked by White House. The report found declines in employment and new orders, as firms raised alarms about the nature of Mr. Trump's tariffs and the prospect of costly global retaliation. The president is set to receive reports from his advisors on nearly 24 trade-related topics on Tuesday, advising him on how he might proceed on addressing a range of issues. The reports, which are due from the Commerce and Treasury Department as well as the Office of United States Trade Representatives, look at the cause of persistent trade deficits, unfair trade practices by other countries, gaps in existing trade agreements, and recommendations for achieving reciprocity in trade relationships, among other issues. The trade representative, for example, was responsible for identifying countries with which the United States should negotiate new trade agreements, and whether China has upheld its commitments under a 2020 trade deal that Mr. Trump signed in his first term. In several cases, Mr. Trump has acted before even seeing the details in the report, although he asked for reviews into whether foreign metals pose a risk to national security. Mr. Trump has already imposed 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. He had also hit Canada, Mexico, and China with tariffs intended to stem the flow of fentanyl and migrants in the United States, which is another area that his administration was studying. How Mr. Trump's plans to proceed on Wednesday remains an open question, one that has left American trading partners struggling to determine a response. The European Union has already announced that it will respond to Mr. Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs with countermeasures, but European officials are still contemplating how to respond to the tariffs that Mr. Trump will be affected. Officials are also open to placing trade barriers on services, including a new trade weapon that was developed only in 2021. That tool could be a big hit to big tech firms, said two diplomats familiar with the matter, but who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. That means that instead of affecting physical goods, it could have impact on companies like Google, Meta, or even American banks. The goal would be to give European Union more leverage since Europe buys more services from the United States than it exports, making its market and access to European consumers a potential powerful tool. But no decisions have been made. Europe holds a lot of cards. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, said during a speech on Tuesday, "From trade to technology to the size of our market." Officials are emphasizing that their goal is to still negotiate, though they will respond firmly if needed. All instruments are on the table, Ms. von der Leyen said. Them to claim tens of millions of government rebates, $1 million worth of government subsidies under a program just before it expired. Now the Canadian government wants to know exactly how the electric car maker managed to move 2 cars a minute off its lots, a rate that assumes those 4 dealers had stayed open 24 hours from January 10th to January 12th. Those payments were frozen this month after Mark Carney became Canadian's Prime Minister and named a new transport minister who ordered officials to fully examine each claim individually and determine whether all eligible or valid. The minister, Chrystia Freeland, said no payments will be made until we are confident that the claims are valid. Canada. Tesla's gain was a loss for some of its competitors. The company's breathtaking flurry of sales claims for some of its dealers in Ontario, British Columbia, and Quebec drained funds from the government's rebate program, bringing it to a close before its scheduled March 31st end date. As a result, the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association estimates 225 dealers selling other brands were unable to claim about $10 million in Canadian dollars, putting some of them in financial peril. When you're looking at a $43 million hit over a weekend, an investigation is definitely warranted, said Hugh Williams, a spokesman for the Dealers Association, track rebate payments. Under the government plan, which began in 2019, dealers deducted rebates of up to 5,000 Canadian dollars when they sold election vehicles before reporting the purchase information, including buyers' names and the vehicle's identification numbers, to the government. For outlet in Montreal was defaced with pink paint, and in Vancouver, organizers of an auto show banned the company over concerns about possible protests and vandalism. 4 Canadian provinces have excluded Tesla from their electric vehicle rebate programs this year. At least one Tesla competitor has been trying to cash in on the antipathy. Polestar, the Swedish-based Chinese-controlled EV maker, is offering Canadians a $5,000 Canadian dollar discount if they prove that they are registered Tesla owners. That is all that we have time for today. Thank you so much for listening, and apologies for the computer issues. Goodbye!